Hello, my name is Brittany Kabinski and I want to welcome everyone. It is now 1 p.m. so we will begin our presentation shortly. Today on Friday, May 11th, we will have our presentation on Understanding Urban Goods Movements given by Suzann Rhodes. For help during today's webcast, please feel free to type your questions in the chat box found in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen or call 1-800-263-6317. For content questions, please feel free to type those in the questions box and we will be able to answer those at the end of the presentation during the question and answer session. This is a list of the sponsoring chapters, divisions, and universities. I would like to thank all of the participating chapters, divisions, and universities for making these webcasts possible. And as you can see, we have a number of webcasts coming up in the next few months. To register for these upcoming webcasts, please visit www.utah-apa.org/webcast and register for your webcast of choice. We're also offering distance education webcasts to help you get your Ethics for Law credits. These webcasts are available to view at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive, and you can follow the instructions on how to log your distance education CM credits. You can also follow us on Twitter at Planning Webcast or like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on the Planning Webcast Series sponsored by chapters, divisions, and universities. And to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, May 11th, and then select today's webcast, which is Understanding Urban Goods Movements. This webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. We are also recording today's webcast, and it will be available along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And at this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, who will be Suzann Rhodes. Suzann Rhodes is located in Columbus, Ohio, and is a principal with CDM Smith. She is the Client Services Manager responsible for CDM Smith's FHWA work. Suzann possesses over 35 years of experience in transportation, project management, freight, corridor, environmental, and land use policy. Policy analysis, planning process and procedure development, program administration, planning training, public involvement, survey research and statistical analysis, and regulatory compliance. She served as the project manager for the $3.75 million four-state I-70 corridor dedicated truck lanes feasibility study, the Ohio statewide rail plan, and as the principal investigator for Transportation Research Board's NCFRP 15 Study Report 14, Understanding Urban Goods Movements. Prior to joining CDM Smith in 2005, she served as Ohio Department of Transportation's Planning Director, and prior to that as the Executive Director for a multi-state MPO and LLD for Appalachian Regional Commission. While at ODOT, she helped develop and author a number of planning documents, including the first ODOT statewide freight plan in 2003 and the statewide multimodal long-range transportation plan, Access Ohio, from 2004 to 2035, and various ODOT policy guidebooks, including the planning sections of the project development process, the Guidebook on Environmental Justice, and the Public Involvement Guidebook. Ms. Rhodes holds 2 master's degrees from Pennsylvania State University, one in public administration and one in regional planning. Her undergraduate degrees in urban affairs and sociology are from the University of Pittsburgh. She has served on AASS HTO's SCOP and several TRB committees, including statewide multimodal planning, environmental justice, and intermodal freight transport. Let's welcome Suzann Rhodes.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can.
Okay, good. Today's presentation, as mentioned, is on Understanding Urban Goods Movement. As in any good continuing education programs, we've listed a couple of learning objectives that we hope you're going to walk away from with this after listening to this presentation. First is how, why, and where freight or goods move, how it's connected to the economy and land use planning, and the impact of planning and zoning regulations on urban goods movement, and what you can do to improve the access and mobility of freight in your local community and your local economy. My goal on doing these broadcasts, and I've made a number of presentations on this, is I think that every planner, no matter if you're a young planner or one who's been around for a long time, can take what you learn from this and take this PowerPoint presentation and give this in your local area. You should be smart enough, and it's basic enough that you should be able to do this yourself when you walk away. As was mentioned, this project, this presentation came out of a TRB, Transportation Research Board, NCFRP study number 15. It was done by the firms of CDM Smith, we were Wilbur Smith Associates at the time, Hellcrow Associates, the University of Southampton in the UK, RSG Incorporated, and Sustainable Ports. So it was a team effort. A lot of pretty smart people worked on this. I was the kind of the manager, so not saying that I was the smartest person on this team. I certainly was not. The purpose for the and products out of this study were to produce a guidebook, and this guidebook, I'll give you the link to it, is available for free on the web. You can download it from TRB. It was designed for public decision makers, for planners. It focused on urban goods movement, pickup and delivery inside an urban area. We didn't look at trains. We didn't look at really big port deliveries, but it's mainly what's going on inside your community on your local roads. It's to try to help you understand and improve the decisions that are made in terms of zoning, land use regulations, and other local regulations that impact basically trucks moving around your urban area and what you can do to improve them, these movements. The intended audience, and believe it or not, some of the panel for TRB didn't realize that zoning is under the authority, in most cases, of local governments. They believed that MPOs and state planners had authority to make these changes. We did some education, and we designed this guidebook so that it educates and that the local officials can use it. Local planners can do it. It's also written so that the MPOs have ideas of what they can get out of it, and academics and researchers can use it for instruction and courses, and also private sector stakeholders will get something out of it. We had 4 ultimate products. One was the guidebook, which is for free on the web. The other one is an executive summary. And then there's a resource CD that includes 2 PowerPoints with speaker's notes. These are not free on the web, but if you, at the end of this, my email's there, and if you really want copies of these CDs, you can send me an email. I've got about 50 of them that we printed extra that we will send you happily so that you can use them and do presentations. And others who have received these have been very successful in making the presentations on their own. The executive summary is not included for free, but it is on that CD. It was an 8-page document intended to be something quick. No elected official is going to read a big, long guidebook. They will look at a colorful 8-page document that links urban goods movement, links those truck transportation issues with their local economy and their growth in their community. So that's what this was designed as. It was meant to quickly capture their attention. We've pre-tested it with a number of elected officials, and it seems to work pretty good. One of the things that we who've worked in freight for many years understand is that you need to have a champion. You need to have someone besides just the staff saying, yes, we need to look at freight movements, truck movements, goods movements. That's where the authority to assign staff the responsibility to do research and to make changes will come from. So that executive summary should not be underestimated. Okay, this is what the guidebook looks like. It is now Report 14 if you're searching on the web. It has 6 basic chapters in it. We're going to cover 5 of these today, a little bit of number 6, and I'll tell you what's on that resource CD if you want a copy of it. First lesson is the importance of goods movement in the environment. And the way we've written this is an attempt to bring it home to everybody. You've, for example, walk by a bakery, and what you see on the outside and what you see are people, the ladies here selling the donuts, selling the baked goods. What's behind the scenes that you don't see are the baking and the ingredients and all the effort that goes into preparing this. As you know, those items need to come from somewhere. Most stores, because urban areas real estate is pretty expensive, don't keep a lot in stock, so you need to have a lot of deliveries in the back, in the front, wherever they come in order to supply, and it's an ongoing basis. You know, many places like this receive deliveries every day. We interviewed grocery stores, and we interviewed a fairly large chain of grocery stores who indicated to us that they have their own truck fleet. They make 40,000 deliveries a day. It's because they only keep eggs and dairy on their shelves 2 days. They need to replenish it. Frozen food, produce, fish and stuff, 1 to 3 days on the shelf. Dry goods, 7 days. Anybody who's lived through a hurricane or tornado warning knows how quickly those shelves empty off, and that this is a 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week delivery cycle that needs to be maintained. Everything is sort of not seen to the average shopper or the average person, but it requires a seamless system in the back of goods moving in and out. Excuse me. Many people working in freight will tell you freight is the economy in motion. It's where jobs come from. If you don't have materials delivered, you can't have a job. It's also providing access to markets. Here are some facts that are in the guidebook. There are also other facts in this guidebook, but these we thought captured people's attention. I'm sorry. In 2010, approximately 55 tons of freight was moved in the U.S. for every single person. It's estimated by 2040 that there'll be 70 tons moving. That's an increase of 27%, or for every 2 trucks you see on the road, there are going to be 3. Most of these goods originate and terminate in urban areas. The value of these goods is 81% of all the goods moving in the U.S., those that are going into urban areas. People have often asked, what's the cost of moving goods? For example, if you buy a head of lettuce, it's that it costs you $1. 4 cents of that, about 4 cents of that, is the cost of shipping it around. So if you can improve the shipping costs, you could potentially lower the price of consumer goods to people. If you have a shirt, every shirt on your back, it's maybe a 14-cent cost to move that around. Now, don't take me precisely and exactly, but these are kind of an average of cost of everything you own, the cost for moving it around. Certainly, a Maserati isn't going to be 14 cents of every dollar there, but general urban goods fall into about this approximation. Logistics in the U.S. is a large share of the economy, a large share of the payroll. The interest that has happened over the past few years, and I'd say it's probably 10 years now, that the transportation community and planners have really begun to pay attention to freight. It's just because the volumes of trucks on the roads have been going up so much over the years. Everybody has, this is at, I think this is the Port of LA Long Beach. Nationally, there is a lot of congestion. Congestion on the roads comes from trucks in addition to cars. A lot of times people talk about getting those trucks off the road, but in all honesty, and I'm not a big advocate for trucks over trains, the way some part of the supply chain, trucks move it. They'll bring it, you don't get a train in the back of that bakery unloading flour and yeast. So we do have to pay attention to that first and last mile, and those are described in more detail in the guidebook. Now, this slide is, and I want to take a minute here to explain. Goods move on barge or on rail or on boats, on trucks, in the air, and you'll see two axes here. One is on cost and one's on speed and reliability. And the size of the dots means is meant to display the difference in what % of the movement is by each of these modes. Obviously, air is the most expensive way to ship something. It's also the quickest. You wouldn't ship coal on air because it's pretty heavy and it's really not required immediately. However, if you're manufacturing and want to get a pair of glasses or some fine equipment, medical equipment somewhere, it's a high value equipment. You may need it quickly, like transferring a heart or a lung, so you would use air. Rail car tends to carry heavier loads. They don't get there as quickly. The timing is not as reliable. So this chart is meant to explain, and I'm hoping I've done it well enough that you understand. It moves through various modes, and the reason it picks the modes is how much it costs, how much it weighs, how quickly it needs to get there, and how reliably it needs to get there. Trains are not as on time and reliable, nor are boats, as much as a truck may be. So hopefully that gives you a kind of a feel for how, why, where, and what moves goods. As said before, freight supports the economic development and quality of life. It keeps your region competitive. If you don't have good access and egress, good roads, good truck access, good rail access, your community may be losing out on economic competitiveness. Now, the second lesson is about supply chains, and we did a lot of interviews and a lot of testing and developed 12 supply chain case studies and models. These are detailed in the guidebook, a lot of information on each of them. We have a drawing on each that very simply explains supply chains, the modes they use, and how they get from their origination to you, the consumer. I only have 2 in this part of the presentation. The other 10 are at the end, so if you download the PowerPoint, you have them. You're welcome to use them. We've presented this to economic development folks, and their response was, thank you very much, because this helps us understand why it's important to get that train route near our home or near our community, why it's important that the airport be supported to support our overall economy. This food chain example here talks about, the production and the gateways and how it may come in to different vendor plants, goes to a regional distribution center, that's the DC, could go to a warehouse, satellites. Many of these are by truck, and then they go to individual restaurants and institutions. So it's a lot of truck trips. In an average is, if a truck that satellite truck you see there will, on average, make 10 to 12 stops a day over a 130 or 140 mile distance. Here's big box realtor, something like a Walmart or a Home Depot, and you see the things come in by boats and trains and trucks, and again they are distributed through distribution centers, sometimes regional distribution centers, and go to the individual retail stores. We have a backhaul in here because in some cases things are returned for one reason or another. Freight data, as any planner knows, you can't do good planning without good data. Freight data is available nationally. It's available on local levels, and in some cases you can create it yourself. There's a fairly lengthy chapter in the guidebook on freight data. I'm going to just cover some very general sources of data and how it's used. From the national level, Bureau of Transportation Statistics and FHWA, if you go to the FHWA website, the Freight Analysis Framework, maybe some of you have seen these spider maps. Every state has a spider map. They can tell you the origin and destination, what's flowing through, into, and out of your state. The railway bill sample, this is not available for public distribution, but your state DOTs or state rail agencies can get this information for government use. Also, there's private data through TransSearch. IHS Global Insights has kind of high-level state and national data available. To get to the very specific node or local level, this is a map that shows one way of demonstrating where freight is coming into and distributed from in your local area. Talks about production and consumption nodes. There are like woods and pool data and a variety of other data sources for freight generators in your community. If you have a modeling staff person, they will probably have some of this information or can help you with this. If not, go to the guidebook, and it's a way to do a demonstration of where a lot of the trucks will be coming from and going to in your community. You can get this down to the neighborhood level, and you may want to display it like this if there are issues of concern, and these may vary from community to community. You know, things like congestion in certain areas and safety and security and noise in various areas, depending on what level of a freight or urban goods movement study you want to talk about. Now, down to the regulations, and this assumes that planners know what regulations there are in their community, and it doesn't get into a lot of detail. It gets you to, if you're going to do a urban goods movement plan for your community, the types of regulations that you may want to take a look at. Talks about design standards, land use and zoning, urban truck regulations, parking, loading zone regulations, time of day restrictions, truck size and weight regulations. And I'm going to just point out some of the examples of how the regulations you have may be positively or negatively impacting goods movement in your area. We'll talk about setback ordinances, parking ordinances, geometric design, some signal timing, and access management. And a picture's worth 1,000 words. This is a building that was built many years ago, obviously before the trucks of the length that we have now were prevalent. As you can see, it's blocking traffic and causing congestion. There are ways to improve this or eliminate the situation, modifying certainly you're not going to go in and rebuild the building, but you could require shorter length trucks. You could look at different parking patterns on angles. You can look at your building codes to make sure your setbacks are adequate for the future so this doesn't continue to happen. If you're building new buildings, you could ask that they do some redesign of the building. There are lots of things you can look at. This is just an example of a design standard that you may want to reconsider. Here's an enforcement issue where the delivery truck is having trouble getting in and out because cars are parking in the loading zone, parking in the areas where pickups and deliveries are supposed to happen. What could happen in a situation like this, if there's no space, there's a dumpster there, that truck may end up circling the block again and again or parking illegally, double parking. So looking at your parking ordinances and enforcement is an important thing to consider when you're doing an urban goods study. This is a picture out of New York City where you could look at your geometrics. This bridge was obviously designed a little too low for a truck. Here's some other roadway geometrics issues. You can see in the bottom left corner the truck can't make the turn, so it's going over the curb each time. And looking at your design standards for roadway geometrics, it may make a difference here. There are trucks swinging out into the other lanes, so any new design, you may want to take a look at that. Certainly construction delays are problems. I'm speeding up here because of time. Truck regulations. There are often route restrictions and size and weight restrictions that are placed in urban areas or enacted in urban areas. We did a project, and I'm not picking on Atlanta, but it's a very good example that they recognized that the MPO in Atlanta recognized that a number of their communities had truck routes in them, but in some cases the truck route in one urban area hit a road in another urban area, the next adjacent community, where it was no trucks. So they did get together and they looked at, as an MPO, looking at all the truck routing to make sure it worked and was consistent in all the adjoining areas. This study also looked at the importance of designating a route so that if there's a shutdown on the interstate, that truckers knew how to get from one side of town to the other without going through sensitive neighborhoods, but on routes that were acceptable to both the community and to the vehicle without being illegal. So that's kind of an MPO urban goods movement study that can be done. There's just some guidelines in terms of coming up with a truck route study, and our firm and many firms do these studies. The routes should be designated, they should be properly designed, and they should be operated to maintain and accommodate trucks. Okay, we're going to put it all together now. I talked about all kinds of various, what, why, and how freight moves, where it moves, some of the regulations that impact it, the importance of having a champion so that you're actually getting authority to do this kind of urban goods movement study. Certainly you need to understand the political environment. Is there a champion? Is there somebody that will support you? Is your boss interested enough? Can you do this study and have it be something that you do in addition to all the other work you have to do? Certainly get organized, look at some baseline information, what's out there, talk about identifying some stakeholders and doing some interviews and inventories. If you go to the FHWA Freight Office website, you can't deal with freight private sector stakeholders the same way you do as the public, and I'm probably not saying anything you don't understand. These are business people. They don't have a lot of time. They don't often want to share their personal opinions with you because you're the government and you're there to help. But there are some techniques. There's a book, a guidebook that we've prepared called Engaging the Private Sector in Freight Planning that is also available free right on the FHWA Freight website. They also do workshops on this, on how to talk to freight stakeholders, both shippers and carriers. One of the, I'm just going to throw in an idea here that we did is we went to a number of trucking companies that are fairly large in different urban areas, and we just put a map of the area on their wall in their truck driver's ready room, told the dispatcher there what we were trying to do, and we had little dots, like red, yellow, green dots, and put a little note on the wall with the dots and said, please put a number on your dot and where are the problems in our urban area that you have as a truck driver driving through our area. And we came a week later and picked it up, and sure enough there were quite a few dots, and you could see where there were major potholes, there were signage problems, there were geometric problems, and it was a kind of a quick and dirty getting to the private sector without a lot of time on their part, and fairly easy. You got back a map. Now maybe it's not entirely scientific, but it still will get you a good feel for what are the problems from a motor carrier point of view in your urban area. Certainly you need to look at your regulations. You need to summarize issues and problems. You need to do education and outreach to your community about why this is important and talk about potential solutions. I like to think that this is a good job for a summer intern. Go through this presentation with them, show them some of the pictures. The guidebook has more on examples of problems. Say, ride around, drive around, spend some time looking and seeing if you can identify the congestion, the mobility, the access problems that motor carriers have as a way to start doing take some pictures, start finding out what your problems are or may be. Okay, in terms of following the planning process, we tried to keep it real simple here. Reach out to decision makers, pick a project manager, talk and work with your MPOs. Often the MPOs have freight people in them. Certainly FHWA division office, every state has some, and a lot of the state DOTs have people who are freight experts. Get organized, start developing some surveys, identify contact stakeholders. As I recommended, please go to that Engaging the Private Sector handbook before you start. There's some surveys in there, some hot tips on when and where and who to talk with in the private sector. This is a copy of that guidebook. You need support. You can use some of the slides in here to do some outreach and education on board members, planning commission members, other staff. Look at your regulations and start identifying solutions. Here's a simple little map that we put together just as an example of things that may be a problem. The red line is to indicate a truck. The truck is starting at the arrow and trying to get over to the bakery. Cannot take the shortest route because of that first bubble there, unable to make that left turn, the not being allowed to go through the center of town, some geometric problems. This is just a potential example, something that you could come up with yourself. Here's one possible solution, and through a designated truck route and enforcing parking so that the truck can actually get to the bakery pretty quickly. We've got in the guidebook some spreadsheets that talk about different problems and potential solutions to sort of help you get on your way. We've got information on truck routing that will help. And here's just a few more of the pictures. You got vehicles parked in the loading zone and the alleys crowded with trucks. This is like an enforcement issue. I'll get to an example in a few minutes. In the case studies which we did, there are 9 case studies in the guidebook. I'm going to talk about the New York City one, but each of these had a different urban goods movement problem. Each has a different solution. New York City, they've had commercial vehicle regulations for 100 years. Part of the problem was in enforcement. If you're a New York City police officer, obviously there are a lot more problems than just trucks parking in or cars parking in a truck loading zone. The part of what they did, New York City put together a special freight division, and my apologies to anyone from New York City on the call. I'm really not doing you justice in the wonderful program you put together. One of the things that they did was they put together some training materials and separate documents on explaining to the police trainees why it was important to ticket and to keep moving people and keep the truck loading zones available for trucks. Signage was another thing they looked at. Only 5% of the signs or the streets in New York were designated as truck routes. The signage was different. The location of the signs, the design of signs was different at many of the intersections. They were able to identify and to standardize so that a truck coming into New York City will know exactly where to look for the truck, exactly where they could go, and it was consistent and easy to spot. A lot of their regulations were very old. This is Wall Street, and this was, I guess, around 8 or 10 in the morning. There's just deliveries happening every minute of every day in New York. One of the programs they also came up with and they had funded was to look at off-hours delivery, which was to have trucks deliver in the evenings and nighttime hours when the streets aren't as congested. Rensselaer Polytech did the study for them, and they found that it was an overwhelming success. They, the drivers were happy not to have to deal with all the congestion. For example, restaurateurs were happy not to have that bucket of tomatoes come through their front door when they had customers there. Bottom line is they did a very thorough, New York City did a very thorough look at what was going on with trucks, what was going on with the regulations, with the deliveries. They talked about the different problems they had and identified some very specific solutions. They found a champion. They were able to communicate their mission. They educated their law enforcement officials. They got their route signs consistent. They looked at the delivery times and the impact that was having, did a special funded study for off-iris delivery, and the program really worked very well, and this is being looked at in a number of other cities in the U.S., and the federal government's doing a little more funded research on off-iris delivery programs. Principal findings from New York City are that law enforcement officials must have the details of the truck routes and the waiting rules. There were companies in many urban areas that double park because they can't get in, and they just assume $1 million a year in traffic tickets as part of their cost of doing business, because they have to cut double park, and it's less expensive than having their driver circle the blocks and missing their delivery windows. The resource CD that I'll send you if you ask has this PowerPoint presentation and other PowerPoint presentations on it. It's got speaker's notes with it. There's a literature review. There's a glossary of all kinds of freight terms. There are how-to examples and examples from other states. How-to examples in terms of doing freight studies. There's also a very short 10-minute PowerPoint presentation on the CD, or you can take this PDF if you're good with PDFs and modify it into a PowerPoint, but I don't know if you want our logo on every slide. You're welcome to use that if you like. So hopefully through this you've understood a little bit about why urban goods movement is important to your urban area in terms of economic competitiveness, in terms of getting the quality of life to your residents, your citizens, getting food to them in a timely manner, getting products to them. Hopefully you've understood a little bit how the supply chains work, that weight and timeliness and size makes a difference, that being able to get into and out of a store with products is important, and you can't use an airplane to deliver coal to a vendor, or that airplane's not going to supply your Walmart with clothing. Talked a bit about the impacts of the regulations and the land use codes. Tried to present you with the planning process, saying that, you know, throughout my life, no matter where I've worked in what area, I've always been able to follow the planning process, which talks about engaging stakeholders, doing data analysis, setting some goals, coming up with recommendations and alternatives, and just applying the planning process that you all know to this freight and urban goods movement is a way to be successful in developing a freight or an urban goods movement plan. Provided case studies, both case studies of communities who've recognized problems and addressed them, and case studies of supply chains. So in wrapping up, and we're wrapping up a little bit early, urban goods movement is important to the economy and quality of life. Local regulations and decisions can impact the efficiency of those movements. Things like we talked about in the Atlanta area, things like not enforcing parking regulations, things like trucks not being able to turn corners and reaching out into different lanes and causing congestion. And you as a local official, you as a planner, can make changes, can improve freight movement this is something you can do. It's something you can easily do. You just need to think about freight, start being able to see and recognize the problems and come up creatively with solutions. So I want to thank you. I'm going to click, just be patient with me. These are the other supply chain slides, and they're all available on this PDF that you can download. There are more of them, but I'm going to go back to my thank you. It's NCFRP Report 14. This is the link where you can get the guidebook for free. There's my email address if you have questions. If you want a copy of the CD with the PowerPoints on it in PowerPoint format so you can adjust them. They've got speaker notes. I really believe every planner can do this without me. Read the guidebook, ask questions. You can make a difference. You can make this work. Okay, thank you very much. And we can take questions now.
All right, thank you, Suzann. So our first question comes in from Lance. What has been your experience with roundabouts in areas with a high volume of truck freight traffic?
I personally have not done a lot in terms of roundabout design. I know that these are not a favorite of many truck drivers. If they're not designed right, I should clarify that. There are the turning radius on truck is obviously different than a car, and you just need to design them right so that, and there are some designs out there that are modified for trucks so that it's kind of a bricked inside circle so the truck is not killing your flowers if he goes over that. But I cannot speak for the motor carrier industry on those. If there is research on it, others have done studies. There's ATRI, American Transportation Research Institute, ATRI. If you Google that, they are the research arm for the Trucking Association. I would never claim to be able to speak for the motor carrier industry or the truckers, but ATRI does, and you can Google them, and I believe they have some studies up there on roundabouts.
All right, great. Our next question comes in from Paul. Could you please summarize how goods movements are impacted by zoning regulations, since zoning only applies to private property regulation, but goods movements are public right-of-way where zoning has no bearing?
You got to give me a minute to think about this one. I did have an example. Okay. Zoning, sometimes what has happened over the years is you will have an industry that has grown up, and around it has grown a residential area, and conflicts start to arise because although the industry was there and generates a lot of truck traffic, the more the residential area has grown, they don't like, it's almost a conflict with, they want peace and quiet, and they don't want trucks rolling down their streets. What we found happening in areas like that is the pressure put on the city council, the zoning board, often comes from the many residents, and the industry, which does bring jobs. It's one or two people from the industry versus 45 residents, and the elected official or the zoning board person is really in a conflict, wanting to keep those jobs and wanting to keep the residential area. So it's more of, just like airports have had trouble over the years when communities have grown up around them. So that really does link the zoning and how zoning evolves. Also, the case study we had on Baltimore in the guidebook talked about what was going on in the port area, where when the economy kind of was going gangbusters. Houses were built in right up on the docks, some very nice condos if you've ever seen them, but you know, if you have Morton Salt coming in there, Morton Salt can't relocate anywhere else because they need that 18, 20-foot deep port, and you've got the cry for more housing, and it's a compatibility issue. You know, different people want different things and where they're located. Baltimore, together with Maryland, addressed the problem with an overlay zone, recognizing that, you know, you lose that dock space for industry, it's gone forever, and that dock space and those port access places are part of what makes the economic base of Baltimore, and it needed to be preserved. So they worked out an overlay zone, and it was things like if it was 18 feet or an existing port access, it was maintained, and you can go to the guidebook to the example, but just I think that kind of answers the question on how does it impact zoning, or how zoning and freight interact.
All right.
If I didn't answer that, he can send me a note and we can talk.
Yeah, and Suzanne's email address is listed, so if you want to follow up with her on anything, it's, you know, you can shoot her an email.
And I am not the absolute hands-down expert on urban goods movement. We had many people working on this study, and I'm trying not to give you opinion, but give you perspective.
Great. Well, our next question comes from David. Buses and garbage trucks also have similar issues with overpasses, turning radii, and restricted roads. Is there any collaboration among the various vehicle associations who suffer the same issues through pursuing different purposes?
Absolutely. They do have similar issues. And in many cases, when there are studies being done by state DOTs and MPOs, there is collaboration. I know that the motor carrier lobbying groups often work with the public transit folks. When we did the study on dedicated truck lanes, we looked at putting buses on them too, which makes a world of sense. There's an example, and I don't think we did this as a case study example, in San Francisco with garbage trucks that are now restricted to sort of off hours, more in the morning hours, so they don't conflict with traffic, and people don't really like seeing garbage trucks on their street. Problem was when they back up, they do that beep, 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 and people weren't happy with that, but that's one of your trade-offs. I'm not sure if San Francisco is continuing that program, but that was one of the things that was looked at, kind of an off-hours time for trucks, and every community has different values and priorities, and yes, there is a interrelationship, and these groups do work together.
All right, our next question comes in from James. How have you dealt with municipalities that get development and taxes while the neighboring municipality just gets the traffic?
That's why you have MPOs. That's an issue that communities need to work together. It's one of the reasons that metropolitan planning organizations were established, that this is a transportation problem. It's not just the way that air floats from one community to the next, and pollution goes from one city to the next. It's a regional government type of issue. I mean, I can give you examples when I was a MPO director of how we dealt with that, but once again, it's something that should be handled if you're in a metropolitan planning organization area, and I brought to their attention and discussed. I'm sorry, I'm not giving a really great answer on that other than contact your MPO.
Okay, well, we still have time to take questions, so if anybody has any questions they want to send in, I'm kind of lacking on questions right now to ask you, Suzann. We'll give people a minute to come up with some questions, formulate some thoughts.
Do I need to talk longer for people to have their 1.5 hour credit?
Well, we are approved for 1.5 cm, so we should try to go as long as we can. But if we do end a little bit early, we'll be okay. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a good opportunity to ask any questions you might have. Just follow up on the presentation today. So if anybody wants to send in some more questions, we have time. Okay, here we go. From Jonathan, do you have any insight into defining freight OD patterns? O-D?
Origin destination patterns.
Yep.
That is a lot of what is done with the TransSearch database that IHS Global Insights has. As I said, it's proprietary and it costs money. The FAV, the Freight Analysis Framework data at a national level, also provides that information where, and it came in part from the TransSearch data. It's sort of big and national, and it will tell you that apples from Washington and how they're distributed across the country, apples from Washington State and where they go to. If you click on Washington and the commodities that are moving in that state, you can get that. Not many state DOTs have statewide models, but those that do can pull that data. I'm kind of hesitating here. I'm trying to think. I guess there are 4 or 5 state DOTs in the U.S. that have that. The TransSearch data, and the reason it's proprietary on origin destination is that, if you're Schneider Trucking, you don't want Roadway to know what you're picking up and where you're delivering it to, because that's a market sector they may want to capture. So that origin destination data is pretty hard. There have been when our company's done work in a metropolitan area or in for a state, there are a variety of approaches we use to get that data, such as you could stop people, you can stop truckers. What we did, and this is just fresh in my mind because we just finished a study not long ago, on Interstate 70, we stopped, I think it was like 870 some odd trucks in one day. We just stopped them for 2 minutes and at the rest stops and asked them where they were coming from, where they were going to, and that we did not ask what commodities they were carrying, but the drivers were very willing to give us those responses. So we did do a OD kind of a analysis, which let us know that that most trucks were going 150 miles on that corridor, etc. I would advise you, if you're looking at stopping motor carriers, that we have contacts with the trucking associations, and we worked with them to do this. You can't just pull a trucker over and ask them, where are you going, where'd you come from? We had a former executive from a motor carrier line work with us to devise the very brief survey. We trained the people and got it done within one day and had a fairly accurate, we think, analysis, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the word I want to use. We had some travel demand modeling and that we used to compare to see that we were pretty close, and it was not the only way we got the data, but that's not exactly easy. Okay, next question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so our next question, how does the good movements issues vary from crowded East Coast cities to Western cities?
I think within the urban area, there are probably similar issues. I know if you're talking LA, Long Beach, with all that's coming in through the ports, that's passing through. I think the Alameda Corridor and a number of other projects have tried to keep pass-through traffic out of urban areas. In most cases, trucks just passing through are going to do everything they can to not go into the urban area, which they know is crowded, and will try to stay out. I cannot, off the top of my head, think of any major change other than the density of some of the older cities on the East Coast is a bit more than some of the density on the West Coast. But there are also the issues of, what's coming in through the ports. Next question.
Yeah, okay, our next question comes in from Goldie. In areas slated for high density or so-called smart growth and covering virtually all the ground, have you had experience in addressing the planners about today's subject? Have you been approached to make presentations like today's?
With smart growth areas? Actually, no, I have not. So.
Okay. And our next question comes in from Debbie. You mentioned your work in Atlanta. What were your findings of that study?
The results were to produce for them and I was not the project manager, and I was not intimately involved on this. I can put you in touch with the gentleman who did that study. Basically, it was to come up with a good routing plan for the metropolitan area, not just any one city, so that trucks, if there was a breakdown on the interstate, they had a route they could follow, and it was about getting that information out to the trucking companies so they don't just have to sit in traffic. I believe it's like $95 an hour is the cost of a truck sitting, going nowhere. So if that person wants to send me an email, I'll put her in touch with the person who did that specific study for more detail.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Tom. Is there a movement to encourage lower-cost transportation modes such as rail and rail intermodal rather than truck that would reduce vehicular traffic and pollution?
Absolutely. I mean, these, look at just two East Coast examples where they've double-stacked both Norfolk Southern and CSX lines through the Heartland Corridor and the Northeast Gateway through more efficiencies. And there's a new switching station in North Baltimore to avoid having to go into Chicago, which is where all the East Coast and West Coast railroads meet. The very biggest customer of the railroads is intermodal, or the trucks. There are more containers going on rail, more and more, and they do work together. They're not always in competition. I think that everyone in transportation would say, as much as we can efficiently get off the roadways, the better. But I challenge you to tell me one thing you have on your body or that you've eaten that didn't get to you with a truck. I mean, at some point, that final mile that we discuss and describe in this document in the guidebook is usually by a truck. I mean, there's only so much you can do to get products moving in other ways. And I'm talking, don't tell me your computer, because that's electronics and the coal-fired plant, and your computer probably came to you by a truck delivering it to that Apple store or Best Buy or wherever.
Okay, our next question. Does the guidebook discuss conflicts between trucks and bicyclists on the streets?
No, it doesn't. I brought that up to the panel, and every NCHRP, every TRB research project has a panel that of experts that's supposed to review and advise, and they said it was beyond the scope, and we just wanted to focus on truck movements in urban areas. And frankly, in some cities you've got bicycle couriers, but it's beyond the scope, I was told, so we didn't do anything on that.
Okay, our next question comes in from David. So in reply to designing streets to accommodate trucks, what about the opposite? Have cities worked with truckers to use smaller vehicles to better fit into urban areas, similar to smaller garbage trucks, fire trucks that we've seen pictures of in Japan and have started to see?
Very good question. And actually they're starting to be sold in the U.S. and put together and produced in the U.S. Some smaller delivery vehicles that are just actually electric vehicles. Like I said, a lot of trucks travel about 130 miles, 120 miles each day, make 10 or 15 stops. These electric vehicles actually work for that. They're being imported from Europe. They are starting to catch on. I think in New York City, FedEx has moved to or is moving to this. I'm not sure if there or if it was one of the big. No, maybe it was like Staples or what's the other Office Max or somebody. But there is a movement we're starting to see that is happening. So yes, I think everybody wants to do the right thing. It's just a matter of time and money. And creativity, okay?
Yeah. Our next question comes in from Carol. Have you observed any notable changes or reductions in truck traffic volumes along traditional truck routes with the increased emphasis on double-stack rail activity?
I would not want to answer that question without looking at state DOT or FHWA data. I think that, I guess Norfolk Southern just opened that line recently. I mean, my examples would be from the East Coast, where the double stacking's been going on the West Coast a lot longer. So I would not want to answer that without looking at the data. That might be a good research project for somebody in the coming years. Next question.
Yeah, our next question comes in from Goldie. Can you speak to considerations for newly urbanizing peripheral areas that should be taken into account in their comprehensive planning, and how should they be thinking ahead?
I think they should go to some of the pictures in this guidebook and go to some of the issues, and they're laid out in there in terms of things like, and I don't know if the building codes come under everybody's jurisdictions, but when you design a building, making enough freight elevators in it, if you have the dock space, making it be adequate within in the area, considering options for nighttime deliveries. A lot of the ideas that are in here are maybe easier if you do them ahead of time rather than you're trying to retrofit a urban area that's older and existing. So, I mean, New York City really had a challenge because they're older. If you're just starting to build and design, if you just think about freight when you're building it, you'll be ahead of the game. Okay, next question.
All right, our next question comes in from Jonathan. How do downtowns balance truck loading and vehicle movement? Are you aware of loading zone parking codes being changed to encourage downtown commercial or retail redevelopment?
You know, I think it varies around the country. One of the calls I made in terms of trying to find a case study community was to a kind of a Rust Belt city in the Northeast, and they said, we just let them do whatever they want. We're just so happy to have them. Because it means the economy is moving. I do think it varies from city to city. I'm sorry, I can't tell you there's a big trend. I think it's more today than more interest today than in the past 10 years, from just being kind of an old planner. I have seen in the last 10 years an interest in freight and people addressing freight and freight issues much more than I ever did in the last 30 years of my career. So if that is anything to go on, it's sort of just my gut. Next question.
Okay, our next question comes in from Patricia. To what extent are people involved in conservation design, those who are advocating for narrower streets, engaging in discussion with those who design extra large trucks, wide and long trucks?
I don't think that the extra long and wide trucks are intentionally being designed for the complete streets or for the urban areas. Those are intended for your long haul, shipping across. There are a lot of different kinds of trucks, and the American Trucking Association, the U.S. Chamber, is very engaged in talking with their members, customers, and people about what belongs where. And these discussions do go on, and I don't, the trucking companies they're not going to design a 52-foot container to go into an urban area, because they'll get stuck there. They can't get around. They don't want that to happen to them. They're business people. They're doing what they can do to make the most money and make the most sense. So, next question.
All right, so our question comes in from Kevin. Higher tolls on major truck routes are causing truckers to take alternative routes on smaller highways that do not charge tolls. What do you suggest can be done to offset this trend that is putting undue wear and tear on less capable roadways and infringing more upon the local communities?
That is true. The motor carrier industry, the truckers, they really dislike paying tolls, and they do try to avoid and will take parallel routes. I know in Ohio they were having that type of an issue on the turnpike, the Ohio Turnpike, and what they did is the state DOT subsidized for a short period of time the cost of the tolls for the truckers in order to get them back on the turnpike, so that they could see it was a smoother, quicker, better route to take. I don't know that every state DOT would be that generous with their highway funds. I think it was Route 2 in the state, and they had several very bad crashes involving trucks that prompted that. Yes, you're right, that's going on, and all I can do is give you that one example. I think what needs to happen, and this is my personal opinion, is that we need to raise the motor fuel tax, the gas tax, if you will. It needs to be indexed. It hasn't been raised since 1979. If you look at what you're paying in gas tax every month, it's probably less than you pay in your cable bill. It's less than you pay for your water bill. Do the math. They need to raise the gas tax so that you don't have to keep putting tolls on these roads. And I think the politicians' answer is to put tolls on the roads so that the user pays, but it's not as fair as raising the gas tax. Just my personal opinion. I'm not sure everybody agrees, but if you do the math, look at what you're paying, it's not very much. Next question.
Okay, this one comes in from James. How have regulations changed regarding our national borders?
Oh, you mean is this person referring to the Mexican trucks, and that we have different regulations for for trucks in the U.S., different air quality standards, etc. I was just on a conference call with someone about the border crossings, and Canadians have a higher weight limit than we do, so there are some, like in Michigan, they have higher weight levels to accommodate this. So they've looked at doing that up in Maine on the border states. I think the states have accommodated these things. Mexican trucks that have different emission standards are restricted to certain limitations on how far they can go. From what I was told, the Mexican trucks that do travel into the U.S. are pretty close to quality of our trucks now. I can't remember who I was talking to. It was somebody with the feds. I don't know if that's, you can make a big generalization about that. And it tends to be, they don't, trucks at the borders don't come in. Canadian trucks do, but after they get so far in, they make the adjustments for weights. So it's a state-by-state regulation that determines truck size and weight. There's some federal standards, but different states accommodate these things in different ways. So hopefully that answered that question.
Okay, our next question comes in from Kathleen. With respect to the case studies included in the guidebook, how did these studies get started? Were local freight carriers pushing for infrastructure or regulatory improvements, or was this the driving force, local planning organizations looking to future needs for freight, or were they started because of local motorists concerned that too many trucks were causing problems in traffic?
I think each one had a little different emphasis. In most cases, it was not the motor carriers or the trucking companies complaining. In most cases, it came from a local economic development group, the city. We have a couple, an example in the UK and an example up in Canada, and it was a government recognition that, hey, here's a problem and we need to look for a solution. I don't know, and I'm trying to recall, but I don't remember that any of these came from the private sector trucking community. I think they were economic development and local people and local elected officials. Okay. Next question. Hello?
Oh, sorry. Our next question comes in from Greg. Is there a direct correlation between the dramatic increase in imported goods versus domestically produced goods during the last 15 years, and also the dramatic increase in trucking operations nationwide, or is this trucking increase primarily related to the decrease in rail and the relatively inexpensive cost of fuel?
Without doing a thorough research study, or I will contact, if that person wants to send me that question in writing, I will contact one of our economists who would have a better handle on that. I don't want to give misinformation or just an opinion. I think it was a very good question. I will send it to a transportation economist that we have, if that's okay with that person.
Okay. Our next question comes in from John. Should we assume that trucks will continue to be the primary freight transport mode nationally, or will rail transport become more important, and how should we plan for this?
The projections that I'm seeing are that rail's going to increase, but trucking's going to increase more. Just the last last few years of projections, everything I have seen have said the same thing, that rail's going to increase, but truck's going to increase more. So hopefully that answers that.
Okay. Our next question comes in from Elaine. Does this study address conflicts between urban goods that are freight and the urban train commuter?
No, that was beyond the scope. It just looks at how you can improve goods movement There are other studies out there on passenger and freight rail conflict, but this does not talk about that. This was meant to be for how you as a local planner, land use planner, zoning official could look at your community and make changes to improve the truck mobility. Next.
Okay, our next question, do you have any good examples of places where compromises were made and a consensus was reached between the desires of many urban planners and pedestrian advocates in cities to minimize curb radii and narrow streets with the needs of the industry and others for sufficient curb radii and street space for movement and deliveries?
Good examples. I don't have any off the top of my head. What came to mind is Maryland, because Maryland is so much into the smart growth and sustainability. I'm sure there are examples around the country, but I can't think of any specific city off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, and this question comes from Jonathan. Has there been a push for higher CAFE standards on trucks, as we have seen with passenger cars in recent years? And if so, what implication does that have for funding via gas tax?
The trucks are, the newer trucks are much more environmentally, how should I say this, environmentally, they're designed to not pollute as much. The diesel fuel tax is different than the motor fuel tax. The American Trucking Association and the U.S. Chamber and the trucking research groups all have said increase our taxes. Don't toll us. We'll pay more money. We will. They of course have said they don't want it used for anything but routes that, truck routes, and they've spelled out they don't want any of their diesel fuel tax going to bike trails. But they're. I think that the motor carrier community really does want to do the right thing. They are not the enemy. They're not the villain. They're trying to be more energy efficient. They're trying to be more fuel efficient. They're trying to be more environmentally friendly. I've had my personal discussions with them and don't agree on everything, but I think that everybody, we need to try to believe that everybody wants what's right and start negotiating at that point. I've talked to a lot of trucking companies, lots of presidents of trucking companies, and they just want the same thing that people want, to make a good living, not pollute the environment. So I don't know how to answer that question. I would reach out to them if you have in your area a trucking company. They're friendly, good people. They'll give you their opinion. Go to the American Trucking Association website. Go to ATA. They will. If they don't answer you, call me and I'll get you somebody who'll talk to you about it. So I'm sorry I can't answer that any better than that.
Okay, and our next question comes in from Kelly. I think this will be the last question we take for today, so if we don't get to your question, or if you have something you want to follow up with Suzann on, you can email her. So this question, what are your thoughts on allowing large delivery trucks to park on streets where there are 2 traffic lanes in each direction in lieu of blocking valuable parking spaces?
Say that again. Could you please read that again?
What are your thoughts on allowing large delivery trucks to park on streets where there are 2 traffic lanes in each direction in lieu of blocking valuable parking spaces?
Letting them, I guess I'm not understanding that question. Letting them double park?
I think it's instead of parking on a one-lane street where there's parking spaces and using up the parking spaces, letting them park on a two-lane traffic lane, and I guess just park on the outside lane.
So that, inside an urban area, so that people can still get by. I think that's a regulation that a local community would have to look at the layout and the traffic patterns and how much traffic's on that street. And I don't think I could make a comment on it without seeing the design. And there are people that are traffic engineers and traffic designers to see what the flow would be. So I'm very sorry, I can't really accurately answer that.
Okay.
Thank everybody for their questions, and don't hesitate to send me an email if you have something I didn't answer.
Yeah, and thank you, Suzann, for the presentation today. And anybody can follow up. I know we'll be posting the PDF of this presentation, but you'll also be taking emails if people are interested in getting the resource CD. And I posted a link to the actual guidebook as well. And so I guess that'll conclude today's session. And for those of us who are, those of the attendees who are still with us, I'm going to go over how to log your CM credits for attending today's event in just a moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, first off, to log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, please go to www.planning.org/CM and select today's date, which is Friday, May 11th, and then select today's webcast, which is Understanding Urban Goods Movements. And this webcast is available for 1.5 CM credits. And we are also recording today's session, so you can find a recording of this webcast along with a PDF of the presentation at www.utah-apa.org/webcast-archive. And this does conclude today's session, and I would like to thank everyone again for attending.